always say that this is the best kick in the pants I ever got, because he said, Tim, it's a great idea, I just don't want to do it. So when Muppets put me on freelance and I wasn't working there full time anymore, I started playing around with doing different toy concepts. And one of my high school classmates' father owned a toy company that is called Fun World, which they do primarily seasonal toys for like Easter, St. Patrick's Day, Halloween. So I went and I talked to him about doing some, different things for Halloween. And one of the things I did was some masks that were a soft foam that were vacuum formed. And then you could cut it up and apply it to your face so it would move. So it was like a cheap way of doing foam latex. So you could do it at home. So I got into the idea of playing around with doing more toys, and only Hasbro would see me because I had worked on the Dark Crystal toys, but none of the other toy companies would let me in the door. And they said, if we don't know you, we don't want to know you. And I was like, well, what does that mean and why? It's like, and it's because they're so paranoid that the idea or concept that you're bringing them is not yours or original, that if they don't know you, they don't want to know you because they don't want to get sued by somebody else who says that was my concept or idea. So I went to Toy Fair that year. I think it was 82. And, I was trying to make inroads with some of the toy companies, and I wasn't getting where. And I picked up one of the Playthings magazine, and in the back of it was an ad for Seven Towns, who was an agent who represented toy designers, inventors, and licensed properties. So I called them, and I think it was Art Taylor who I spoke to originally, and he was like, "Well, we already have a lot of people working for us. We don't really need anybody new." And I said, "Well, I used to work at Muppets, and I have a lot of really." "Oh, you used to work at Muppets," and that got me in the door. And then at the same time, I was working with Maureen Trotto, who we were doing, puppets or props for TV commercials. And Maureen and I both went in and started pitching ideas to Seven Towns for different toy properties. And the first one that we sold was Sectaurs, but what Sectaurs came out of was this fly, which I showed you. This I had made in my downtime when I was at Kermit's studio, because I would just fool around with materials and try different things with my hands. And originally I had made a crab that was both my hands, like this, and I put the eyes on my thumbs so his eyes could pop out of his shell, and then these were his legs. And then I got into the idea of, well, what else can I do with my hand? And I made this guy. So this is where Sectaurs started. This crazy little fly puppet. And I made this because I kind of never liked the idea of wearing masks at Halloween. And I thought, oh, what could I do that's simple and creepy? And this got like the most incredible reaction at Halloween parties. I would just go over and have it light on somebody's shoulder. And they just like, or I'd go and stick, it's proboscis in, somebody's drink, they would flip out, And it's just a really simple thing, but also just like adding the little tufts of fur fabric, just made it like even that much more creepy. It's such a simple thing. So, and the idea of combining materials, because this is like silk on the wings, and this is polyethylene foam that I used magic marker on and latex paint, and the paint's kind of peeling off now. So this was one of the things I pulled out of the bag. And Larry Mass, who was then the representative of the office in New York, said to me, "Oh, I love that thing." He said, "We should put an action figure on the back of it, and we'll turn it into a whole line of action figures." So then Maureen started working on building other insects and characters, and we just took other companies' action figures and ripped them apart and reassembled them and doctored them. And Larry showed it to Coleco at Toy Fair that year. I think that was it 83? I think it was, maybe it was 82. And Coleco loved it, so I quit my full-time job that I had gotten after I had left Muppets because I was freelancing and I was running out of money, so I went and got a job at a small toy company on Long Island. I quit that job and I started working with Maureen on doing design and development sketches for Coleco for Sectaurs. And that's all we did for like 3 months, was just come up with character ideas and sketching and doing concepts. So, and then going up to Coleco and meeting with them and showing them the direction we wanted to go in. And the things that we drew were a lot more naturalistic. They were more, they weren't as I don't know, slick or defined as what Sectaurs ended up becoming. But it was, I think, the first time fur fabric was used on a boy's toy that wasn't for infants. It's like that it was used as something creepy, and for older boys. And some of the companies, were surprised that we wanted to use fur fabric. Like, like little boys aren't going to play with plush. And I said, yeah, well, little boys will play with plush if it's disgusting. I was looking at like field guides to insect books, and then looking at the insects and going, okay, how would this be a sector? What would the human character be? And there's so many great things, from mosquitoes and wasps and, to beetles that are like, like little freight trains, So there were so many different things that have come from nature. It's easy, to develop characters and storylines. And Maureen was doing more writing than I was. It's like we were both sketching and drawing and making prototypes, but she was more into writing storyline.
Narrative and stuff.
And she comes from more of a theater background, whereas I was more film and television. I think Larry Mass came up with the idea of doing the symbiotic relationship between the human character and the insect. Is that they didn't have to communicate verbally, that one knew what the other one was doing without saying anything. So, but yeah, the good and evil thing, it's all classic stuff and the names, we were throwing out names, and Coleco, originally Sectaurs was called Skyriders, and that's what we pitched it as. They changed it to Sectaurs. So, kind of learn, and the other thing that we used were Da Vinci birds, the wind-up birds that you can use. I mean, you used to see them all over in the city, people throwing them, to sell them, and they're just little plastic birds with a rubber band as a motor, and you wind it up, and it flaps its wing and it flies for as long as the rubber band lasts, and then that's it. But the original Sectaurs prototypes, we used the Da Vinci bird and the wind up, so that it's not as good as manipulating something with your hand, but you're engaged because you have to wind it. Then Coleco basically took the same concept and added the batteries and the motor, which Maureen and I always felt it made it a little clunky and heavy for a kid's hand, because it even, I mean, kids still loved it, but we always wanted to like go back to making something more lightweight. And Maureen and I actually pitched that we didn't want to do an animation. We wanted to do a live action film with stop motion insects. And Coleco loved the idea. We went out to California to start production on it, and Maureen was very active in writing the script with Larry Brody, and Larry's probably known best for doing the screenplay for Conan the Barbarian. And we were both working with different studios, from doing full-size scale models of the Sectaurs that actors would ride on, and then with the Kyoto brothers we were doing small animated insects, stop-motion animated insects. But unfortunately Coleco, even though Universal wanted to, I was willing at that time to put up $10 million to do it, Coleco had to match it with $10 million, and they got cold feet because they had a huge failure with the Atom computer, and that their money just kind of disappeared. They went in the wrong direction. They were doing things that were totally out of their league, and that was the end of Coleco. I mean, that was the beginning of the end of Coleco. And also they had invested in doing Rambo action figure toy line, and I'll never forget the guy who was taking in properties, was meeting with inventors, said to me, came to Maureen and I, and he said, we're going to be doing Rambo action figure toys. What do you think about that? I said, Jerry, I think it's the biggest mistake you could ever make. And he said, why? Why do you say that? And I said, well, because the people who are having children right now were all the people who are protesting against the Vietnam War. They're the biggest pacifist generation in the history of the United States. They are not going to buy their kids Rambo toys. And he said, but it's going to be a cartoon. I said, it won't matter. They are not going to buy Rambo toys. And of course, Rambo was another huge failure. So, and producing action figure lines, the startup costs and the mold costs are really high. It's like you have to generate a certain amount of dollars. So we were going into the second year of Sectaurs, designing them, and they were doing the second generation with smaller insects because the price point comparative to other action figure lines out there was too high, the first generation. So they were doing, Night Fighter Dargon and all that stuff with smaller bugs. And we were working on the movie, and then it's like everything just started falling apart, and that was the end. So they called us back from California, and we could kind of see the writing on the wall that, that was the end. And then I think they decided, they still hadn't quit the idea of doing Sectaurs. So they did the animation as a kind of, instead of doing the film. And this series came out, I don't know that it got all that much airtime. The whole idea of doing the serial, the TV commercials were done in the series, so they kind of were thinking, well, now we'll just do an animated cartoon and it'll be on Saturday morning television and that will sell. But, it's like it doesn't, when all these things don't gel and they don't fall into place at the right time, it doesn't go, and then they just lost money in so many other places that the only place they were making money was on Cabbage Patch Dolls. So that was the end of Sectaurs.
The far reaches of the universe is the star planet beyond a perfect world until their biological experiments exploded, creating an exotic realm beyond all belief. As mutant life forms ravaged their global paradise, a new and incredible species emerged, the Sectaurs. With Prince Dargon leading his warriors of the Shining Realm against the evil General Spidrax, he would destroy all to rule all. His terror troops of the Dark Domain know no mercy. The brave, the bold, and the fearless stand with Dargon. The brutal and cruel attack with Spidrax. These are the Sectaurs, the warriors of Symbion.
It's fantastic. Such high quality animation. Yeah, and when I went to Designer Con, I took one of the Boglins with me, and it's really interesting because for the most part it's people who are in their 30s and up who remember it because they had it when they were kids, and they were coming over and, oh, Boglins, and I was like, yeah, hi, you know, it's like I was the co-creator of Boglins and all this stuff, and they said, oh, and you know, like, and then I would start playing around with it and moving the eyes, and people who were walking by who were not familiar with it were just like looking at it like, what the heck is that? You know, they couldn't believe that, because, you know, it's when you put something, a battery in something, the way it moves is just a repetition, a form of repetition. The fact that with Boglins you could take your hand in it and manipulate its face and move its eyes and make it blink and scrunch its face down and stuff means it was reactive to the person who's in the audience, which was totally different. You know, I don't know like of any other toy that did that, you know. And the same thing with Sectaurs is because you could pounce on things, you could manipulate it yourself. You weren't relying on, you know, it wasn't a watch me toy. Like they always say that's the worst toy you can make is something that a kid just flicks a button and it moves across the floor because it holds their attention for like 2.5 seconds and that's the end of it.
Collection.
The great thing about it is that you can watch kids play with toys and it's totally real to them. You know, it's like they're totally gone into a different
no
world.
filter.
That's the one. No, but that's the magic of it. You know, it's like being that age. You know, it's like when I go over and watch friends who have little kids who are like, you know, 5. You know, little boys that are 5, and they just, you know, like they pick up anything and it's a weapon. You know, it doesn't matter what it is, and they're just gone completely.